All right, let's go ahead and get started. I want to start off by saying thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules and joining us today. I know it's a hectic time for most, especially right now. My name is Jess, and I'm the marketing manager here at Indexed.io. If you have any questions throughout the webinar, just place them into the chat window and we'll answer them at the end. We'll also be recording this, and a link to the recording will be included in the follow-up email. So I'm sure it's no secret to any of you that the legal world is facing a boatload of challenges with electronic discovery. Challenges like data accessibility, scalability, management, and overwhelming costs. And these challenges are the exact reason Indexed.io was created. We took the latest technologies and made the most comprehensive e-discovery tool in the industry. So what's so special about us? Well, Indexed.io is a true do-it-yourself intuitive platform, meaning you can get up and running in minutes without ever talking to a sales rep or even utilizing a project manager. We also cut traditional processing times from days to minutes with our auto scale technology. Need to fire up Indexed.io on the go? No problem. We offer a free mobile iPad app that is easy, intuitive, and secure. You can literally review, code, redact, and organize your e-discovery documents no matter where you are. Indexed.io is also the only e-discovery solution that provides a daily hosting model. So what does this mean? Well, it means you have more predictable billing, easier project management, and no minimum hosting charges. There are also no long-term restricting contracts, no licensing fees, no user fees, and no minimums per month. And now for the main event. Austin, our support representative here at Indexed.io, is going to lead the tech tips discussion for you today. Austin?
All right, thanks for that intro, Jess, and thanks to everyone joining us today. So like Jess mentioned, today we've got our top 5 tech tips that I'm going to share with you today. These are just some tips that are going to make it easier to use Indexed.io, kind of understand better what you're doing with your searches and how your exports are going to be run. And then our last tip is going to revolve around OCR because we've gotten some questions about that lately. But before I get ahead of myself, I'll jump into our first one here. This one's going to revolve around search. And so searching, when you come in here, we're going to work with our email from field as our example, and it has this little drop down here. So this drop down is what our tip is going to be about today. And so we have a few different options you can select. There's is not, contains, starts with, and ends with. And this is really just determining how the keywords you enter in this box are going to behave. So the tip that I have for you is generally, if you're not sure how you want to do it, contains is going to give you the best, most all-encompassing results. When you look at this drop down here, you can see email addresses often get saved a little bit differently depending on what system they're coming from, how the data was stored before it made it to Indexed.io. Sometimes it's got a first and a last name and the email. Sometimes it's just got a first and last name. Sometimes just a first name even, sometimes just an email. So it can show up a lot of different ways. And if you just leave it on the default is option, it's going to require you to match the email as it appears exactly. So you're going to have it exactly like this. This one's a little ridiculous. Corporate benefits at this. There's some pluses in there. It's very easy to miss stuff if you're not really sure exactly how their email appeared. So switching it to contains can make it easy. All I would have to do, for example, to catch all of these Brian email addresses is just type Brian. And it looks like I clicked on something there. So Brian, enter. And so now that's going to return results anywhere where it showed up in his email address as part of the name. It's just a little bit more all-encompassing than trying to do an exact hit. So anytime you're not sure what the email appears as exactly, or even for any of our other text-based fields, contains is going to give you a little bit more broad results, and it can help you kind of upfront before you're really sure exactly what you're looking for. So that's tip number 1. Tip number 2 is also going to revolve around search here. And this is something we get asked about every once in a while is, do you have a persistent highlighting feature? Some systems have a tool where you can come in and enter keywords, and then any documents that you pull up, it's going to automatically highlight those keywords for you. And we don't have a persistent highlighting feature, exactly like that. But what you can do is come in here to our advanced search and you pull up the text field. And so let's stick with our previous example. I'll just search for Brian and then search for this. And it worked kind of the same way. Once I bring up one of these, over on our coding tab here on the bottom right, there's our search hit section. And so you can click on this and it's going to highlight those now for you. And normally this only happens if you type in the search bar or if you've done one of these searches previously. But a cool little trick you can do is if I save this search now, let's call this highlight Brian. Now it's saved in my saved searches area. So if I refresh my page, it's going to show up on the sidebar here. And now if I just want to view everything in my project that has Brian in it and have it highlighted for me, I just have to click on that icon here. It'll take me into that saved search, and I can click on any of these, bring them up. It's going to do that autofill search hit section for me. And you can have it highlight your records very quickly like that. So it's not a permanent, persistent highlighting, but you can kind of save keywords like that that you know you want to come back to and be able to find very easily. So that's tip number 2. Tip number 3 is going to be about export. So this one's going to be about kind of QCing and prepping your exports. The way that I like to do my exports is I'll actually set up a tag in advance. So I'm going to go into my whole data set here. I'm not going to filter anything. I just want to explore the whole collection. And I'm going to go in here and I'm going to say remove anything that's a duplicate. Let's remove anything that's a system file, anything I've tagged as privileged. I'm just removing stuff I don't want in my export here. Get down to our final set. There we go. And now I'm going to tag this. Let's call this, export 1. And now I have an easy tag that I can work with. It's going to be my export set, and I can kind of go from there. So now we're going to QC this. The first thing that I like to do is go into our grid view here. Come over to, if you scroll to the right, there is a page count section. And I'm going to sort on page count, and I want to see what the biggest items are, because most of our export options are image-based export options anyway, or build per page. And so it's nice to know if you've got a couple thousand page documents lurking in there that are going to drive your costs up. Maybe you want to placeholder them. Maybe you've got some really big spreadsheets that are just not going to show up well as a PDF. So to kind of know upfront, what are big documents, what's kind of lurking in there. And then to go into these, and I'm going to actually tag these to be placeholdered because I just don't want, giant page counts in my export. I don't want to pay for those. I'd rather just give them the original file. So I'm going to tag a couple of these. And the next one here, we actually have our spreadsheet, so I can have it do those automatically. I'm not going to bother to tag those ones. And then everything else there, 5 pages or less, not really something I have to worry about in my export. So that's the first step on QCing, is kind of get a tag set up and then take a look at some of the bigger files and make sure that you actually want those included. And then the next step I'm going to do is go in here and actually start the export. Select all of my collections. I'm going to enter that tag that I've set up now. And then come down here to the bottom, and there's actually going to be a nice little warning section for some additional QC stuff that you can do. Looks like there's no processing exceptions, which is nice. That's a good first check to go in and see, did anything not process correctly? Was it encrypted or corrupt, or maybe an unsupported file type? So you can go in and take a look at some of those. Duplicate and redacted items are a little bit easier. Generally, if you want to include or exclude duplicates, and redactions will be things that you've already applied during your review. So just letting you know that they're in there. So the 2 things we really want to look at here are processing exceptions and no page items. No processing exceptions, but I'll show you how to quickly get to those items while you're doing your QC. All you got to do is come up to our search. We'll go back to that export tag I've set up. I want to see all the ones that are tagged for that export and that are tagged processing exception. We mark those automatically for you. So I can come in, there weren't any items here, but if there were, I could review, see what happened with those, and work from there. But we're going to look at the no page items. So let's see. There is a page count field over here. And it was 0 pages. So we've got our 1 item in here, no pages. Let's take a look at this. And this is an MP3 file. So of course it's not going to have anything that we can actually produce as an image because it's an audio file. So I'm going to mark this one to be placeholdered as well, because I just want to give them that MP3 file. I don't need to try and create an image or anything. It's just going to give them the file as is, and they can listen to it there. So now we've taken a look at some of those warning items. The last thing I recommend doing to QC your export is to take a look at your families and make sure that they're consistent. And what I mean by that is, say you have a privilege set that you have here that you've been working with, and you want to come in and make sure that all of these items, the emails they were originally attached to, those are also marked as privileged, because we don't want to be producing partial sets. Maybe the spreadsheet got included, maybe the original email got included. It's just a nice check to see, is everything that I tagged appropriately. So I'm going to create a new tag now that's called privileged family check. And then I'm going to check this box underneath here that says tag related. And what that's going to do is it's going to pull anything that's tagged in this set or anything that's related to something in this tag set, and it's going to add it to that tag as well. So, if maybe I'd marked this email, but I didn't mark its attachment or vice versa, that's what we're checking for here. And the last thing you need to do then is come up here to your filter and say, let's look at everything that's in the privileged family check that didn't actually get tagged as privileged. Apply that, no items, perfect. So all my privileged families are consistent. The whole thing is tagged. There's nothing lurking on the outskirts there. So we're ready to go ahead and actually run that export now. So all you would have to do is go back to your export, fill out that first page again, hit next, and then configure the rest of your options here. So that's tip number 3, is best QC practices. Tip number 4 actually also is export related. So I'm going to get to our next step here. Just fill in that same stuff that we'd filled out already now that we've done our QC. So up at the top here, we had a lot of questions about our output options. What are these? You've got 2 different PDF options. So tip number 4 is just going to kind of cover what the difference between each of these is. So the top 2 options here are our image options. These are billed per page. This is going to create actual new images with Bates numbers on them. You can add other labels like confidential or attorney's eyes only. It's going to resize everything to a standard 8.5 by 11 page, put Bates numbers and endorsements on it. This is really what you want to select if you're trying to run an actual production set. And then underneath here, the build per gigabyte options, these are going to be more for downloading. Some export specs require text files along with like TIFF images, because TIFF images don't have the text embedded like our PDFs do. All of our PDFs that you create with this build per page option are going to be searchable, but our TIFFs are not. So if you're taking TIFFs, it's a good idea to take text as well, so they have all that context available. And then underneath here, the native, this is the original file that was processed in the project. So this is what you're getting when you have placeholders for items. If I'm placeholdering spreadsheets or those documents that we'd set up during our QC, it's going to give them that original spreadsheet file, the original MP3 file, and you can choose that for placeholder items or for all items. So you can take a copy of every native file if you wanted, or just the ones that we couldn't produce as a good image. And then the last option here is native PDF. This is the one people generally have questions about because, we already have a PDF option up here. What's this native PDF? And that's just a PDF that already exists in the system. It's the one we make during processing. When you're in looking at documents, it's the one you see in the viewer. So if I go in here and look at any of these, this PDF over here on the left is what that native PDF is considered. And as you can see, I mentioned placeholdering spreadsheets. This is kind of why I recommend doing that, is because you get these big PDFs that are just kind of hard to read. It's a lot easier, I think, to work with a spreadsheet in Excel than to look at a 34 or sometimes 1,000-page spreadsheet in a PDF. So just be aware of that as you're working in there. That's why I usually recommend spreadsheets get placeholdered. So that's tip number 4, our different export types. PDFs are going to be, like I said, resized, branded, provided as part of a production set. And then the native PDF, it just gives you what's already in the system as is. It's a lower cost because we're just giving you something that already exists in there. You can even get that copy just by coming into the system here and downloading it in the top there. That's going to give you that native PDF copy. The benefit of doing that as an export is that you can get, a couple hundred files at once. You don't have to click through every single one and hit download. It'll just give you a nice zip file that has everything in it. Makes it very easy to print all of them at once, or to just download them all as a set so you have them locally rather than have to click through index.io every time. All right, and that brings us to our last tip here, which is going to be about OCR. And so we've had some questions about, when are my files going to OCR? Do you guys OCR records? Can we get searchable text from our documents? And the answer is yes, we do OCR files, but it's going to be a couple of checks to determine whether your file actually goes through that process. The general rule is if your file already has embedded text, it's a spreadsheet or a PDF with searchable text included, we're going to use the text that was already provided. And beyond that, if it doesn't have searchable text already included, there's going to be a couple of checks. We have a help article here you can see. If you just go to our help section and type OCR, it'll bring you in here. And basically it checks, was it a zip file, a PST, some kind of container? We don't OCR those. There's nothing really to OCR, so it's going to skip it. Was the file a JPEG? Because we don't OCR JPEGs by default. JPEGs are usually things like camera photos or phone photos, stuff that don't have text included anyway, and so we don't bother with that. And then if both of those are answered no, and it didn't already have text included, then yes, we're going to run it through an OCR and try to make searchable text out of it. So that's kind of that check. And if you do say yes to, maybe you do want to OCR a JPEG for some reason, reach out to our support team. We can set up processing specially so that it'll make that happen. It's just not something that goes in by default. So if you do end up at that last step and your file is not going to be OCR'd, but you feel like it should be, you can also do it locally in Adobe. Adobe actually has their own OCR feature. So before processing, if you want to try and get your own text included in some of these records and just have us use that text, you can certainly run that through in advance. I have an example placeholder file here pulled up. So this is what placeholder files are going to look like in your productions. We talked about that a little bit earlier. This is a spreadsheet file that I placeholdered. So in your actual image PDF set, it's going to just show you this. It says produced in native format. It gives it the Bates number. And then elsewhere in the production file, it's going to have the actual native file, that actual spreadsheet that they can open up and work with in Excel. But say this was a file that doesn't have any text. I'm not sure if index.io is going to OCR it. I just want to be absolutely sure that it has text when it goes into the system. So I just have to come over here, go to the scan and OCR option, click recognize text. And you can even do this in multiple files at once. If you have a whole big set of PDFs that maybe have text or maybe it has partial text, you want to get better text before it goes into the system. Select the files you want to do, click recognize text, and Adobe is going to run through this and add searchable text to all of these files here. All right, so those are our 5 tech tips. I'll hang around for a little bit to see if anyone has any questions we can answer. Thanks for joining our webinar today, and definitely check out our webinar next month. We do one a month, we try to anyway. What's up, and we'll answer questions about, what's new in the system, what's been coming up frequently, and try to answer questions that anyone has during the session. So definitely check us out monthly.